up just to get down. I don't know if I can get them, but I got them right now. Hey, I wake up just to get down. I don't know if I can get them, but I got them right now. Develop these bars for the developing stars, whoa. Ranked by the stars though, but they know just who they are. The knowledge is deep, man, cause college is bleak, man. Knees of the bees, man. Devy happy hour now. I trust him with everything. Every conference giving me confidence. Hipping is hopping and really no stopping. I'll make you a champion. Y'all put a sock in it up. But this is life, bro. They're at it all night, though. So you can just drive slow and get down with the Devy crew. I wake up just to get down. I don't know if I can get them, but I got them right now. Hey, I wake up just to get down. I don't know if I can get them, but I got them right now.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you are listening, wherever you are listening. This is episode 74 of the Devy Happy Hour. My name is Skip Newton, coming to you from Eagan, Minnesota. Excited to be back talking Devy with all of our fans. Thank you very much for listening. Let's get right into my co-host from North Carolina, Matthew Jackson. How you doing, Obi-Wan?
I'm doing good, man. I'm hot. It is a blistering, like close to 100 degrees here in North Carolina. It's as hot here as Bijan Robinson's stock currently, man. I am sweating. But it's good to be here talking Devy with you. Hopefully that'll cool me off a little bit. We'll see.
I love that this is the second podcast in a row where we've started it off by calling you hot. So we're on a trend here. It's no longer just a random thought or we're throwing something out there to see if it sticks. It's now a trend. So we'll have to work that into as many podcasts as we can.
We're going to talk about Tank Bigsby and we're going to talk about Matt's being hot. Those are the two things we got to work in every podcast.
Exactly. There you go. Nicely done. We're 1 minute and about the 5-second mark, and we got the first Tank Bigsby mention out of the way early. Excellent job. Good. Now we can move on with the rest of our show. But before we do that, Matt, why don't you quick tell people, where can they find you on Twitter and stuff that you're working on right now?
Yes, you guys can find me on Twitter at DevyMatt. I do my rankings for Dynasty Nerds. I'm getting ready to release a Big Ten article, the first part of my Big Ten articles previewing this conference. If you didn't get enough of it, talking about it the last few weeks and tonight, we're going to do some more of it in article form. If you're a reader, then go for it. I'm also going to be releasing a Devy YouTube channel here coming soon. I've been working the plans around that, so be on the lookout for that.
Nice. I love that. That's a great idea. I've always wanted to try that myself and just have never gotten around to it. So I think that's a great idea. There's just something about being able to see people, instead of just listening to them, which is really nice. Except, when I'm working and listening to podcasts, then of course I don't want to be sitting there staring at a monitor.
Your problem's going to be if you do it, you got to make sure that you wear a shirt. You can't come on the podcast without wearing a shirt.
Unless you're hot like Matt Jackson, then you're okay. I mean, then maybe that's what the people want to see. I mean, you got to give the people what they want.
You don't want to see. You don't want to see that. I promise you.
All right, let's get into some news. It's been a little over a week since our last podcast. Today is Monday the 14th, and momentum is very much gaining steam that suggests the college football playoff is going to expand to 12 teams. And that could happen as soon as the 2022 season. So not this year, but the year after. I don't see any negative to this. This is awesome. This is what the people have wanted. Oh man, that tournament is going to be outstanding. I mean, I'm excited already, and we're over, at least a year away.
It's going to be fun to watch. I mean, this is what we've been asking for the last few years now, and it looks like it's finally going to happen. I don't see this being any different than any other years personally. This isn't going to be your March Madness style tournament where your 16 seed Loyola Chicago beats your number 1 seed. I mean, it's going to be your Alabamas. It's going to be this year. It's going to be your Oklahomas. I mean, there's not. You're going to get the same 4 teams that are going to be competing for national championships. I don't think that changes any. It'll be fun to watch, and it'll be nice to see some other teams in the tournament, but the same 4 teams are the same 4 teams to me.
Yeah, I like the idea that it widens the spectrum to include teams that had that always have such good seasons and don't even get the chance, right? I mean, there's always at least one group of 5 team that is probably deserving of a shot. There's, conference champions from the Power 5 that don't get an opportunity to compete, and you never know, right? And when it's a one game and done, you never know. Yes, the power teams are still going to be there, Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, but again, you get that situation where a team can get hot and just, all it takes is one game. So I think that'll be outstanding. I think it's better to argue over, who should have been the 12th team in versus who should have been the 4th. It's just this, we're guaranteed probably the top 10, and that's good enough for me. So I'm really excited about
Play
this.
to win the game. Something like that, right? That's how it goes.
Yeah, something like that. Before we get into the Big Ten, we got a couple of things to talk about, and both Big Ten related from a news standpoint, in that we did not mention Penn State running back John Lovett when we were talking about all the running backs at Penn State. He has a transfer from Baylor. I think it's probably meaningful that we didn't mention him in our last podcast, but I wanted to bring him up as, there's now like 4 or 5 guys that could potentially be the guy at Penn State. So, from a Devy aspect, I think my strategy is still wait and see what happens and figure it out.
I don't know
later.
what you want from me, Skip. I talked about 17 running backs 2 weeks ago from Penn State. I don't know what else you want.
You mean that podcast that we did that was the Ohio State podcast?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, exactly. And then another Big Ten piece of news: tight end Malik Carr, who is a very good athlete, was a freshman last season, is transferring from Purdue to Michigan State, so sticking in the Big Ten, but also switching to wide receiver, which I think I have at least one share of Malik Carr on a C2C roster, and honestly, I'm less enthusiastic about him at wide receiver than I was at tight end. I love the idea of an ultra athletic tight end. I think that's where guys like him could really separate themselves from everyone else. So, it's another piece of news about an athletic tight end switching to wide receiver.
I mean, I saw it.
I'm not excited.
You saw it coming, though. I mean, coming into his freshman year of college, he said that he wanted to try out whatever he landed. He wanted to try out at wide receiver instead of tight end. Like, this is what the kid wanted coming into college. He wanted to play wide receiver. He has that wide receiver, just alpha mentality. If you saw any interviews, his sophomore year or senior year of high school, this kid has I'm going to beat you up. I'm going to go up and get the ball, and I'm going to body you. And he just has that go up and get it, like, alpha mentality wide receiver. So, I mean, I'm not shocked by this. He's got the speed to be able to do it. He wasn't big enough. I mean, he was a little undersized to play tight end anyway, so I can understand it. I don't think it's a great move, mainly because he's going to Michigan State, and there's not anybody over there that's going to get him the ball. But, I mean, I guess you got to like it from the simple fact that there's no one over there that's really going to compete with him either. So, not enthusiastic about it, but it's not the worst thing in the world either.
I agree with the not being super excited about it, but I'm gonna separate myself from that slam on Michigan State. Dwight, that was Matt. He said it. I'm not endorsing that whatsoever. You can go after him this time.
That's at Devy Matt on Twitter, at Devy Matt Dwight
right.
Peebles.
So you can let Dwight, you can let Matt know about your disappreciation for that comment. All right, the last podcast we talked about a mock draft that was published on NFL Draft Bible, and they're basically coming out with new ones every Monday. So we thought, you know what, let's just quickly go over the guys again, because there were quite a few, or at least 2 or 3 players we weren't super excited about in that mock, and so we wanted to see, okay, how does it change from week to week? And some interesting changes on the new one that just came out today. One of the things I noticed was there must be a lot of defensive talent in this next draft class, because, man, was that mock filled with defensive players. I mean, it was pretty sparse on the offensive player list. But, some similarities, a few differences. The biggest one right off the bat, at least in this week's version, the number 1 quarterback, the 101, Carson Strong from Nevada. Now, he has been getting a lot of publicity lately as that guy that could step into the first round. everyone's talking about Spencer Rattler, everyone's talking about Sam Howell, and we're all wondering, okay, who could be the third guy? Is it going to be Keaton Slovis? Is it going to be Malik Willis? Carson Strong not only gets in the first round, but goes 101. How do you feel about that?
Okay. Here's the thing, okay? I like Carson Strong. I think he's a decent prospect. I think he's got NFL potential. And like you said, he could slip into the first round. Keyword there is slip into the first round. He's not going 101. Like, that's not going to happen. For him to go 101, he's going to have a Joe Burrow-like season. I'm talking 5,000 yards, 60 touchdowns, light the college football world on fire for him to go 101 above Spencer Rattler, above Sam Howell, who we're not even going to get to for a second. He's going to have that type of season, and he's not throwing the ball to Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase. He's throwing the ball to who knows who on Nevada's outside perimeter. Like, he's not going to have that type of season that he's going to need to go 101. He's a tier 3 quarterback at best for me. He might slip into tier 2, but he's not the best quarterback in this draft. It's Spencer Rattler, and he's going to prove that this year when he throws for close to 5,000 yards and like 50 touchdowns.
That's a bold statement, but I like it. It is worth noting that Spencer Rattler on last week's version was the 101 again, so 2 weeks in a row. The 102 quarterback Malik Willis. So we talked about him last podcast. He moves up from number 6 to number 2. So again, still in the top 10, and I think that's probably going to stay that way. Falling to the 108 is the aforementioned Spencer Rattler. So still a top 10 quarterback. And honestly, if you've got him on your Devy roster, you're going to love the draft capital. I mean, 101, 108, it's still awesome. I mean, there's no can't miss 101 this year. I think Rattler's going to be the consensus 101, but it's not like the Trevor Lawrence slam dunk of 2021. And then the 110, the guy moving up, and this isn't gonna surprise or upset you at all. The first wide receiver now, Garrett Wilson from Ohio State, so up from 32. So you gotta like that. We already talked about Garrett Wilson's in that group of 4 or 5 guys that you could argue is the top wide receiver. He's definitely in the tier 1 for most analysts, including both of us. So you gotta love that one.
Yeah, he's the first wide receiver in my rankings. He's wide receiver 1, and I don't see myself changing that, and it's definitely not going to change it now that he's a top 10 pick.
Yeah, that is awesome draft capital right there. Then at 114, we've got tight end Jalen Weidermeyer from Texas A&M. So he was not in the last mock that we reviewed. So he steps in. We've talked about, the tight end position. I'm in the camp that I don't think there is a first-round talent tight end, but apparently these mocks are disagreeing with me because we're going to talk about another guy in a little bit. And then your guy, Jaleel Billingsley, has been in a couple of first-round mocks. Didn't make this one, but clearly his name is being mentioned. So, those are probably your top 3 guys. The next one we're going to talk about, I'm excited because I like him, I think, more than a lot of people. But you have any problems with Weidermeier in the first round?
Oh, no, I like Weidermeier in the first round. You may not have a tight end in the first round this year, but I do think that Jalen Weidermeier is a first-round tight end. I mean, he's a big body. He runs great routes, has solid hands. He's fast. He's physical. I mean, he's everything that you want and a go out and catch the ball type of tight end. So I think he's a first-round talent. It was a little surprising to me that he wasn't in the first round in the last mock reviewed, so I think this is making it right for me.
Okay, I can buy that. I don't know. We'll see. There's definitely no Kyle Pitts in this next draft class.
There's no Kyle Pitts in any draft class. Let's be real.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah, good correction there. At 119, the next wide receiver off the board, the teammate of Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave. We've had no problems with Olave being in the first round, and he's been right in the middle of the first round in all these mocks. So this feels like the right spot. We both like Olave a lot. And then the tight end I want to talk about next, at 21, Jeremy Ruckert, another Ohio State player. I like Ruckert. I think he is a victim of the situation when it comes to his production, in that there's just all these wide receivers that we've talked about, and he gets overlooked. But when they do throw him the ball, I really like what I see. So I'm not saying he's first-round draft capital, but I think he could surprise people, and if he can get in the right situation, he's got size and athleticism. I like him a lot more than a lot of our colleagues.
He's a victim of there's not enough balls to go around. I mean, you look at Ohio State's roster, and this year, I mean, they're going to, Travion Henderson is going to command carries and catches out of the backfield. You've got at least 2 first-round wide receivers, and you could make an argument that they're going to look like Alabama and have at least 4 or 5 first-round wide receivers within the coming years. I mean, they have the wide receiver talents. I mean, he's a victim of there's just not enough balls to go around for him to have impressive stats that make you go, these eye-popping stats that Kyle Pitts, for example, we just talked about him that he had. So, I mean, I like him. He put up a really good showing in the college football playoffs that kind of got some guys watching. So he's somebody that I think could potentially, I mean, he's a day 2 guy for me, but he might sneak into the first round. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly. That could depend on how he tests out, in the combine and stuff, and how he looks at his pro day. Then the last 2 guys to talk about, both repeats, so we won't dwell on them too much. At number 30, wide receiver Treylon Burks, so Arkansas, my number 1 guy, love him. And then at 32, the last pick in the first round, wide receiver John Mechie from Alabama, so down from 23. But the last 10 picks, again, Mechie seems to be consistently in mocks, so I don't think this is all that surprising, especially when he had the kind of season he had last year.
Is that Kansas City's? Is that Kansas City's pick?
Actually, on this one, and it's funny you ask, because again, I didn't look at teams really closely, but I did happen to notice this one, and they had Tampa Bay. So it was Tampa Bay selecting Mechie. I think if Tampa Bay wins the Super Bowl again, I'd be a little surprised if they took a wide receiver, but you never know. Anyway, so yeah, we've got 4 wide receivers, couple tight ends, only 3 quarterbacks. So again, not a lot of offensive, Devy picks, those skill positions in the first round. Guys that left the first round from our previous conversation, wide receiver Aeneas Smith, Texas A&M. Neither one of us are surprised by that at all. Quarterback Kenny Pickett from Pitt. We never thought he should have been there in the first place. So again, not a surprise. We already mentioned Jaleel Billingsley. Now the big surprise, quarterback Sam Howell, also out of the first round. I just can't see that happening. I mean, I can maybe buy that he would slip in the first round. Sometimes guys just fall, but somebody's going to grab him. I mean, you can get a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers, for example, right? They've got, Big Ben. He's definitely on the end of his career, but they'll probably still be competitive. They're going to be good. They're going to be drafting in the 20s. I mean, he falls that far. Why wouldn't they grab a guy like Sam Howell? I mean, that just feels like a no-brainer.
Well, let's look at this mock right here. I mean, we just said that Tampa Bay was picking in the last spot at 132, and they picked John Mechie. If you're going to tell me that they would pick John Mechie above Sam Howell, I mean, which quarterback would you rather have as Tom Brady's successor, Kyle Trask or Sam Howell?
Exactly. Yeah. I would snap him up in a heartbeat and say, you know what? We'll let Howell and Trask battle it out, and we'll see what happens. But now we've got our succession plan for when Tom Brady retires at the age of 58, and we'll know what to do then.
I think he just dies on the football field.
Oh, let's hope not. That'd be tragic. Nobody wants to see that. All right, so we'll bring these up every once in a while. Probably not every podcast, but I just thought it was interesting to follow that up with kind of the changes, because we were not fans of that first, few guys in the first mock. This one we like a little bit better, except for the omission of Sam Howell. We're going to finish off the Big Ten today. We're going to go to the Big Ten West, and I think the first thing we both noticed was there is a lot more, at least Devy players, to get excited about on the East side. So this is going to be a little faster than usual. Illinois, we didn't like anybody there really of note. I'm sure that doesn't mean someone could step up, but from a Devy perspective, nothing exciting. Iowa, we've got Tyler Goodson. He is eligible in 2022. It doesn't mean that he's going to come out, but he is a decent running back who I think could surprise some people coming into this year. I've got him. He's a top 40 back, but I think he could make that leap up. I mean, he's got a really nice burst and acceleration. I think it's better than his long speed, but he is a natural pass catcher, and he's got quick feet, got some wiggle as well, and even though he's not the biggest guy, he's not afraid to lower those pads and plow through people. So Tyler Goodson is definitely somebody that people are going to want to keep an eye on. I mean, that the stats aren't eye-popping, but he looks better than the stats would indicate, in my opinion. I mean, he's a good player, and like I said, I like the pass catching, so I think there's an opportunity for him to fill a role potentially. I mean, 5'10", 200 pounds, so he's not tiny. He's a little bit taller than like a Michael Carter, but basically the same weight. So any thoughts on Goodson?
No, the first thing that popped out to me was his pass catching. I mean, his mobility in space and his ability to be a decent PPR back was something that's at least attracts you to Tyler Goodson. When you look at how weak this class is, I mean, you have Breece Hall and you have Isaiah Spiller, who I'll have you note, I just put Isaiah Spiller as my running back 1 in this class above Breece Hall. So went ahead and did that.
That's not terrible. I can live with that.
Went ahead and did that this week, so that's fun. Tyler Goodson, I mean, after those two guys, I mean, the competition for running back 3 is pretty much wide open. I definitely think Eric Gray is going to be that guy. But, I mean, after Eric Gray, I mean, it's really nobody else. I mean, there's no reason that Tyler Goodson can't get at least decent draft capital if he has a good season this year. I mean, he's somebody that, I mean, I'm drafting in the later rounds of like a deep Devy draft and holding on to him and just seeing what happens.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how you talk about, he could step up to be that number 3 running back. We've reviewed a couple of mocks. We haven't mentioned a running back in either one. The one that came out last week had a couple, but I think that would be surprising. I think it's another year like this year where you've got a clear top 2, and now we're gonna wait and see who's gonna step in and be that that 3rd and 4th guy. Who's gonna be in that tier 2 of running backs that can still get late day 2 draft capital or early day 3. Like, Javonte Williams comes out of nowhere last season and was clearly the number 3 guy, by the time the draft rolled.
I was going to ask you that. Was your clear top 2 Najee Harris and Javonte Williams? You're putting Travis Etienne at 3, right? Because Javonte Williams is no lower than 2.
It's a good argument to make because I do like all 3. I think going in, I still had Williams as number 3, but for me, it was more Harris was my clear number 1, and then it was like 2A and 2B. I still love Etienne's explosiveness, and he's got that big playability. And you got to love the first round draft capital. So it's tough to argue with that, but yeah, I mean, if people are going to argue with and say, hey, I like Javonte Williams better, I'm not going to sit there and tell them they're an idiot. That's you can make that argument, and I really like the landing spot for him. I just, it's only a matter of time before he takes over from Melvin Gordon. We're already hearing a discussion on that. Like it's talking about he's taking first team reps. So, I think it's going to be sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, that does it for Iowa. We're going to get right into the next team. That's my Minnesota Golden Gophers.
Row the boat.
The key loss. Yep, row the boat. Row the boat. Key loss would be obviously Rashad Bateman, first-round draft pick to the Baltimore Ravens. Coming back, they've got Mohamed Ibrahim. He is eligible in 2022, so he came back for his senior season, and this guy is the definition of a college workhorse. I mean, I think he had 4 straight 200-yard games last season. I don't know if that's going to translate to a guy that is going to have that same workload in the NFL. I mean, that would be a stretch. I don't know if he can catch the ball because Minnesota never throws the ball to their running backs. So that's a product of the system, in my opinion. But the dude is a beast. I mean, he is a physical running back who likes to just plow through people. And if you have him in a C2C league or a college fantasy league, you're going to love him. I mean, he'll outscore some of our highest rated running backs from a Devy perspective just because of the volume alone. And there is no indication that that's going to change this season. So he could easily see 30 touches a game. And the way that offense is built, you're almost guaranteed 150 yards and at least 1 or 2 scores because they just pound the ball at the goal line.
You can't watch any of Minnesota last year and not fall in love with Mo Ibrahim. I mean, the way this kid runs, he is he's a bulldozer. He's going to run through you. He doesn't have the speed to run around you, but he's going through you, and he's a physical, powerful back. I mean, we don't, like you said, we don't know if he can catch the ball, but there's definitely a use for that in the NFL. I mean, you look at guys in the mold of LeGarrette Blount. I mean, this year, Ramondre Stevenson that went to the Patriots. Like, I think there's a need for this goal line, just pound it down your throat type of back. And that's what Mo Ibrahim is. And I mean, you're looking at the ceiling. He could have a season where he scores 12, 13, 14 touchdowns just because somebody gets him in every trip down to the goal line.
That is true. I mean, he definitely could have that role. So I think there's hope there. You know, and it's just one of those things where you need him to get the draft capital that would give him that opportunity. I love the Ramondre Stevenson comparison from that perspective, right? I mean, he's not exactly the same type, but you know, physical player, big guy, and you know, if he gets drafted by a team early day 3, who knows, right? I mean, he could be filling that role, and you're off and running, so to speak. All right, the wide receiver position is a little more interesting at Minnesota, you know, only because the offense tends to lead to wide receiver production. I mean, yeah, they've had some really good ones go to the NFL the last couple of years, but the talent is still there. Chris Ottman Bell is the first guy to bring up. He is eligible in 2022. He's been the number 3 guy behind Johnson and Bateman, and then last year he was the number 2 guy behind Bateman. Now he's clearly the alpha wide receiver, and I think the more you watch him, the more you'll like him. This guy can make some nice catches. He gets open. You know, he's not spectacular, I think, at any part of the game, but he's a very good wide receiver, and he could be one of those sneaky sleepers that all of a sudden come, you know, next March and April when we're talking about the draft, he might make some noise and surprise people with where he gets drafted. I guess I'm maybe a little more optimistic on him because I'm a Gopher fan, but I like what I see. The next guy that's eligible next year who has no college film to look at, Jalen Wright, a transfer, I believe, from A&M. 4-star athlete, but you know, good size and athleticism, but we haven't seen him. So let's talk about at least these 2 guys before we get into the next draft class. What do you think of Ottman Bell and Jalen Wright?
I don't think you're hopelessly optimistic at all. I love everything about Chris Ottman Bell. He was one guy that popped for me last season. When you turn on and watch Rashad Bateman film, you notice a little bit of Ottman Bell. And this dude can go up and get the ball. He makes great contested catches. He adjusts his body really, really well to the ball. And I don't think he's a sleeper at all. I mean, he's a guy that I think could be, you know, after those top 5 wide receivers that, you know, everybody beats like a drum. I mean, your top 5 wide receivers, your top 5 wide receivers. I think Chris Ottman Bell was in that next group of guys to pay attention to. He's not a sleeper for me. He's a guy that I'm grabbing absolutely everywhere I can because I think he could pop this season in an offense that, like you said, loves to throw to the ball and target one wide receiver.
Yeah, and you mentioned the contested catches, you know, and making the spectacular catch, and that's the best part about him playing for the Gophers. With Tanner Morgan at quarterback, he's going to get a lot of opportunity to showcase his ability to make a contested catch or a spectacular catch because the quarterback play suffered from Morgan in 2020. In 2019, he was very good from a college perspective. You know, people were even talking about him being a potential draft pick. There's a reason why I didn't mention him as a Devy prospect because he isn't one. Do not draft him. If you have him on your roster, hope that he gets back to 2019 form this year and then trade him as quickly as you possibly can.
I think I got him in a C2C league at like round 42 or 43 just to see if he could potentially bring it back.
And I have no problem with him on a C2C roster. I mean, you know he should be the starter. I can't imagine him losing the job. And like I said, they're gonna throw the ball enough. I mean, their defense was so bad last year that the opportunity to throw the ball should be there because they should be, you know, very high scoring games, despite all the yards and touchdowns that Ibrahim is going to get. You know, they're still going to have to pass the ball. So I think the wide receivers, the passing game is still there from a C2C perspective. Any thoughts on Dylan Wright, or is he just one of those guys where we need to see something before we even mention him in a Devy world?
Yeah, he's not a Devy guy to me, and I'm not even sure he's a C2C guy. I mean, you've got nothing to go on right now. You're just hoping that he lives up to that 4-star athlete rating that he got coming out of high school. He's definitely your wait and see type guy. And if I remember right, I don't have it as exact measurements, but I think he's on the shorter side too. So that's just another knock on him. He's not. Must be thinking.
No, he's a bigger guy. He's
Dante Wright. That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking of Dante Wright. I'm getting them confused.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's like 6'3", 6'4", 215. He was the wide receiver 10 in that draft, in that recruiting class. So just amazing how, we've talked about, guys that have gone, AWOL, and we have no idea what they're doing, haven't heard anything from him. He's one of those guys where if we had been doing this together a couple of years ago, we'd have been like, what happened to this guy? So very interesting. We'll have to wait and see on him. And then the last guy was a freshman last year, got some time. Daniel Jackson, not the lead role in Stargate, but the Daniel Jackson, the wide receiver, for those of you sci-fi fans out there. I'm intrigued by Daniel Jackson. I like his game. He's one of those, guys that just kind of finds open space, runs good routes. He's not, he's not a burn a guy deep, but I think he's got decent speed, fairly good after the catch, tracks the ball well. So just kind of a solid, 3-star wide receiver that I think he can move up people's rankings because he's going to get a lot of opportunity at Minnesota, like we talked about with that passing game.
He doesn't do anything spectacular. I mean, he's a decent wide receiver. He's not in the athletic mold that Rashad Bateman and Tyler Johnson and even a little bit of Chris Ottman Bell. I mean, he's not their athletic profile at all. I mean, but he's a decent receiver, and I think if there's going to be somebody that comes up and takes the reins after Ottman Bell leaves this coming year, I think it might be Daniel Jackson. He's one that I'm at least rostering to hope and see.
Yeah, I agree. And worth noting, because I'm not going to really get into him, but last year's freshman running back Kai Thomas, I just don't think is going to be the guy. I mean, I think he's just a guy.
Don't say that. I just drafted him in a C2C league, Skip. Don't break my heart.
I'm not optimistic. I mean, he's going to be okay, but I just 4 stars, but yeah, if I'm proven wrong, excellent, because that means good things for my Gophers. But yeah, I'm not excited about him. All right, let's move into Nebraska, talking about another group of guys that we're kind of not really excited about, but we're going to at least mention a couple guys. We've got running back Gabe Ervin. He's an incoming freshman, so hasn't played yet. And then wide receiver Xavier Betts, who was a freshman last year. Talk about Ervin first. What do you see in this guy? Is he someone that you're going to find on rosters already, or is this more of a just keep the name and keep your eyes on him type of thing?
This is one of those rare Matt Jackson specials that you get on this podcast every once in a while, where it's one of those guys that I see something in that I think is going to turn into one of the guys that you need to be rostering. You're not going to find him on really many rosters unless you're playing in a deep C2C league right now. But I love myself some Gabe Ervin. I mean, his lateral agility, his physicality, he's got the speed to house runs. He's got really good mobility in the open field, jukes defenders really, really well, and he's a decent pass catcher as well. When you look at Nebraska's spring practices, there's one guy that keeps popping up in conversation by a bunch of coaches, and that running back is Gabe Ervin. Coaches really, really like what they see about this kid. And if I'm betting my money on just a late round flyer in this upcoming freshman class, we've already talked about, how much I love Donovan Edwards, and we love Travion Henderson, and we love Phil Moffa was another guy that we're going to get to when we talk about the ACC that I like as well. But the Gabe Ervin is definitely one of these guys that you need to be paying attention to, because he's going to surprise a lot of folks this season, and he's going to be on more rosters than not coming this time next year.
That's interesting. And if I'm not mistaken, our friends over at the Devy Debate talked about this guy when they had 247 grader, what's the word I'm looking for? The scout. They had Alan True, I think his name is, and Alan True was mentioning Gabe Ervin as a guy to watch out, as a deeper guy because he's a 3-star, but a guy that should be turning some heads.
He should be rated higher. He's
it.
Rated higher than a 3-star in my mind. He should be rated higher than 3 stars.
Well, there you go. So we've got a couple different people talking about Gabe Ervin, so that is definitely one people should keep an eye out on. The next guy, the wide receiver, Xavier Betts. So he was on the team last year, fairly quick, had a verified 4.59. He's got pretty good size, 6'2", nearly 200 pounds. And my notes say that he uses the size well, he uses his hands well, and he gets off the line fairly quickly. So another interesting player to note. I mean, he didn't have a ton of production last year, just 12 catches. But, as a true freshman, that's not horrible, especially because, Nebraska doesn't have a great passing attack. What are your thoughts on Xavier Betts?
Yeah, I think he's another one of those guys to watch. I mean, he's got the size. His release from the line of scrimmage is really pretty. I mean, he shakes defenders. He gets good inside leverage on guys. He sinks his hips really well, and he runs, to explode in route, and he runs decent routes. He uses his size, every bit of that 6'2", to go up and get the ball. I think he's going to, when you look at the stats, 12 receptions for 131 yards and a touchdown. That's not very, very impressive stats. But what you got to remember is with the transfer of Wan'Dale Robinson from Nebraska, they're losing a good amount of production. And I think Xavier Betts is going to be a guy that comes in and eats up a lot of that production. I mean, there's no one really else on their roster worth much of anything. And I think between Gabe Ervin and Xavier Betts, Nebraska could actually be a pretty fun team to watch this year. They're one of my dark horse teams. If I've got some free time on a Saturday, I'm going to turn on the TV because there's a couple of guys on this team that I'm really interested in.
Excellent. I like it. So keep your eyes out for Nebraska. You don't need to keep your eyes out for Devy players on Northwestern because we don't have anybody there that we're excited about. So we're going to move right into Purdue. Of course, they have a fairly significant loss in one of the Devy darlings of the last couple of years, wide receiver Rondale Moore, who went in the, I believe, second round of the Arizona Cardinals. Love that. I'm a big Rondale Moore guy. I ended up with a lot of shares of Rondale Moore. I'm not upset about that. But, of course, they still have wide receiver David Bell, who is in that top 5 of the wide receivers for the 2022 draft. I can't imagine him staying. I hope not. I mean, I just don't know how his stock could improve more than it already has. Interesting. Just published today, Brandon Hay from the leaguewinners.com, so theleaguewinners.com, published a really good article comparing David Bell to Treylon Burks. And I took the time to read the article. It was interesting because it broke down, from a analytic standpoint, from a film standpoint, and then there was a nice chart on Breakout, and not only compared Burks and Bell, but it threw in top players from the last couple of drafts. So you had Rondale Moore was on there. You had Rashad Bateman. You had Chase, and so you could see where those guys compared in the last 3 years, or this next year plus the last 2 drafts. It was solid, and he got a lot of quick, positive feedback on that. So for those of you looking for a good article that compares a couple of top guys, I highly recommend that. But where do you have David Bell on your wide receiver list for the 2022 draft?
So this is where it's going to get a little interesting. He's a top 5 receiver for me. I think he's closer to wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 than he is, wide receiver 1 and 2 for me. When you look at Bell, a lot of people were talking, when Rondale Moore had all those, had those 2 injuries and he was out for close to a year and a half. You were wondering, okay, who's going to take over that production? They're going to lose a step. And they didn't lose a step at all. David Bell stepped in and looked really, really good. He's got the yards per catch. He's got some big play potential to him. He's one of those guys that doesn't do anything spectacular, and he doesn't have the just uber athletic traits. But he's just a really, really, really good wide receiver. So he's a hard one for me to rank. He's still a top 5 guy for me. I'm not putting him up to Garrett Wilson, Treylon Burks, Chris Olave type guys, because those guys have at least 1 or 2 traits that they do spectacularly. David Bell is just a solid wide receiver, and if you have him on your roster, you're going to be happy with him.
You said a lot of what was in that article. I mean, the same kind of concepts, right? Because I agree with all of that. I think there's nothing that I get super excited about with David Bell, but he's just very good. I mean, a very good all-around player. And I agree with you. I don't have him, even near the 1, 2, or even 3, but down around 4 or 5. And I have a feeling that he's going to be one of those guys that I don't end up with a lot of shares of. I mean, I don't have any right now, just because other people like him just a little bit better than I do, and so they take him first. I mean, I had one C2C startup, and I had the 10th pick, which also gave me the 3rd pick in the 2nd round, and I took Burks, and then I think Bell went before my next pick, but I ended up taking Keishawn Butte with the 2nd pick, but I have both those guys ranked ahead of him as far as overall wide receiver rankings. But yeah, he is solid. I don't think he has the upside of Wilson or Burks or Pickens, right? Those guys, I think their ceiling is potentially higher. Like they could come in and be immediate alpha receivers for whichever team takes them. Whereas I think Bell feels more like, man, if you had him as your second wide receiver on your NFL roster, you would love it. You'd be in great shape.
You know who he reminds me of?
That's kind of my analysis.
He reminds me of the Rams' Robert Woods, somebody that's consistently underrated, but goes out and gives you the stats week in and week out. I mean, that's the type of player that he is to me.
Yeah, right. I mean, could have one of those seasons where maybe he scores a few more touchdowns than normal and gets up into low wide receiver 1. But is probably a nice, solid wide receiver 2 for you for many years. I like that. And the only other guy on Purdue to talk about is another 2022 eligible wide receiver, Milton Wright. So Milton Wright is another 4-star prospect. Not one of those guys that's probably really well known, only because they've had Rondale Moore and David Bell. So he's the third fiddle, but he has some potential. What do you think about Wright? Is this a guy where you think he could really sneak up on people in that Purdue offense, or is he just a guy?
I mean, he's interesting for sure. I mean, he's had some decent stats. 24 receptions, 305 yards as a sophomore. I mean, playing behind Rondale Moore and David Bell. He could be an interesting one to keep an eye on. He's got decent size to him, 6'3", 195. So he's a bigger body guy that could potentially step up. I'm not really drafting him on any Devy roster, and I don't have him on any C2C leagues either. I mean, he's a jag right now that could potentially turn into something, but I'm waiting on for a little bit.
All right, yeah, I would agree completely on that. All right, and we're down to last and certainly least, the Wisconsin Badgers. We've got 3 guys of interest. None of them have done anything super exciting, at least not for a season. Of course, we all remember the first game last year against Illinois where Graham Mertz was damn near perfect. I think he threw 1 incomplete pass that was dropped, and a lot of that action went to Jake Ferguson, the tight end. Both of these guys are 2022 eligible. What does Mertz need to do to be someone that we should be more interested in from a Devy perspective? Does he need to have just an incredible season? And is that even possible in the Badger offense?
I don't think he needs to have an incredible season. I think what he needs to do is make smarter decisions and take care of the football. I mean, when you looked at it, I mean, he was damn near perfect his first game. Only missed 1 pass, threw for 5 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. And then his last 5 games, he threw for 2 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. So I mean, the wheels came off of the bus near the end of his season, and he started making bad decisions, trying to push the ball into places that it didn't need to be. Yeah, you look at Graham Mertz. I mean, if he takes care of the football better, I mean, I think he's an interesting guy. I definitely don't think he is the next coming of Peyton Manning. Who was it over at the Devy debate? Was that Felix or was that Austin that has him as the next Peyton Manning?
Oh yeah, that was the. They did it.
Or was that might have been Bruning? I think it might have been
really
Bruning.
Hot take episode.
Yeah.
No, it was. I think Felix made some comparison to Manning, and none of the other guys really went with something that was like that out there. And like poor Felix, like, thanks guys. Yeah, here I put myself on the limb, and they totally just. It's like they baited him into it. It's like, man,
he's a good.
As soon as I was listening to that, and I IMing him, and I'm like, dude, really? And he goes, hey, we were supposed to be bold.
It's about as bold as you can get right there. I love it.
It's awesome.
I love it.
But yeah, I agree. I think Mertz needs to have a lot more games like he had that, closer to that first game and figure out the rest, because it was kind of a train wreck after that. Now, Jake Ferguson is interesting. He has been extremely consistent in his 3 seasons at Wisconsin. He's had between 30 and 36 catches each season. Now, I should mention that the low number 30 was last year, was only in 7 games. So he was definitely catching more balls per game in 2020 than he did his previous years. 4 touchdowns last year. That's a career high, tied his freshman season. He looks the part of a guy that's going to get drafted in the NFL. And he could be another one of those guys that, in my opinion, is a victim of an offense that just doesn't really throw out anything exciting when it comes from a passing attack. So he's going to suffer from that, versus a team that might really, throw the ball exceptionally well and get their tight end involved. But I think this guy is a little bit sneaky. I'm not gonna have him on a Devy roster because he's a tight end and the hit rate's way too low. But I like Ferguson as a prospect. I would not be surprised at all if he was like a round 4, maybe round 5 kind of guy. Early, first part of day 3 is what I'm thinking. Am I off base on Ferguson?
No, I don't think so. I mean, he was putting up 30 catch seasons when, they had Jonathan Taylor in that backfield, and he's running for over 2,000 yards a season. When you got a running back that runs for over 2,000 yards, that doesn't leave much room for production at a receiver standpoint, and he still popped on film. So he could be a guy that in a weaker tight end class you could look at and potentially be a guy that, he may go round 4, day 3. He could potentially slip into the end of day 2 and the back end of round 3 if, to the right team. I think that's about the sweet spot for him.
Yeah, that's a good point, because there were definitely some tight ends this year that went on day 2 that were surprises, and so, who knows, right? If he's the right combination of the ability to block and then also is athletic enough, catching the ball, he could definitely sneak into there. The last guy to mention, Jalen Berger, he was a freshman running back last year for the Badgers. He's a 4-star guy. I think he's expected to be the guy, and typically, if you have the guy at running back for the Wisconsin Badgers, then you've got a guy that's going to get drafted in the NFL. And so you have to pay attention to Berger. Not a super stellar freshman year. Averaged 5 yards a carry, so that's nice. He had 300 yards, a couple of touchdowns, 2 catches only, but that's not surprising in that offense. They just don't throw the ball to their running backs. He only played 4 games. So, again, you got to kind of factor that in. You multiply everything times 3 and it's a little bit better. So I think if he is the number 1 running back in that offense, then people are going to like what they see, at least from a production standpoint. I'm still not sold on him as an NFL prospect. I don't think he's great at anything. I don't see a lot of shiftiness and stuff. I don't know. I'm not as high on him as I've been on Badger running backs of the past. What do you think of Berger?
He's not Melvin Gordon and he's not Jonathan Taylor. You can't really make those comparisons. When you look at what he did, if you exclude the bowl game versus Wake where he just kind of threw up a lung, he didn't have less than 80 yards in his 3 games. He was averaging close to 6 yards per carry on every attempt. So, behind that offensive line, he's going to get the stats if he gets a full season. They've got one of the best offensive lines in football. That's a sheer point of fact now. So I mean,
always
you look at that, like, you want to have Ohio State's wide receivers. You kind of want to have Wisconsin's running backs. I don't think he has super high NFL potential, but I think he can put up the stats to at least make some guys interested and possibly even be a trade target down the road. I mean, everybody wants the Wisconsin running back. If he pops, you can trade him for something that you like a little better, that has maybe more of a stable NFL future.
Yeah, I like that strategy a lot. If you already have him, wait till he really pops, and then his value will go up, and then see what you can get for him. I think that's a great idea. I think it's also worth mentioning that we're not talking about any wide receivers from Wisconsin, but somebody is likely to step into that role and be the wide receiver one. I mean, every once in a while, Wisconsin does turn out a wide receiver that does okay in the NFL. So you never know. It's just we don't know who that's going to be right now, and certainly not somebody that you're drafting. I mean, even in deep Devy leagues, I don't think you're seeing any Badger wide receivers. All right, we've wrapped up the Big Ten. So 2 conferences down. We're going to go to the ACC next week, but that is it for this podcast. Matt, any final thoughts? And again, remind people, where they can find you on Twitter and what are you working on?
Man, it feels like there's more guys for Ohio State on one team than all the guys that we talked about today. That tells you how stacked Ohio State is. So I guess if you need anything, go get an Ohio State player. You guys can find me on Twitter once again at Devy Matt. My rankings up on Dynasty Nerds. Always love to interact with you guys on Twitter. Had several guys shoot me trade questions and draft questions this week, so keep them coming. I always love that. And keep an eye out for that YouTube channel, hopefully starting here within the next few days.
And also keep an eye out for the annoying game of keep, cut, trade, where Matt puts 3 awesome players on there, and I'm like, no, I'm not cutting any of these guys. I don't like your game. It's stupid. Go away. Leave me alone.
Forces you to pick.
Oh, yeah, that was brutal. The running backs, the top 3 running backs from last year's class, Gibbs, Bijan, and your guy Tank. And then I actually like the wide receiver one. Ohio State wide receiver is the second one you put out there, even better, because that was interesting. I want to say you had JSN on there, you had Emeka Egbuka,
Marvin Harrison Jr., and
you had Harrison Jr., right?
Yeah.
And that one at least for me was a lot easier. So the other one that didn't like that, but
not many people like the first one.
Nobody liked the first one. But I think the most interesting part of those for me is the guy that you choose to trade. So, you really have to play that battle, with your roster and with your strategy on, do I trade a guy whose value is at a peak, or do I not trade him because I want to keep him on my roster because the ultimate goal of fantasy football is to score a lot of points and win, and this player will help me do that. I love hearing those debates on other podcasts too, because sometimes I think people, they're so excited that a player does really well. His value's super high, he's awesome, you should trade him. It's like, or I just hit on a rookie and I'm going to keep him on my roster and it's going to make my team better and I'm going to win, because that's really the point. So I like those conversations. Of course, we are part of the Dynasty Happy Hour team of podcasts. Dynasty Happy Hour, usually recording on Sundays. I think they've taken a couple of weeks off here, but Tim Keller, Doug Eddy, and Tyler Gunther. Randall Memphis Young does the DHH Contractor every once in a while, so like to hear those. Those are interesting pods where he has a guest on there and they actually break down the Dynasty roster and talk about strategy and advice, so that's awesome. And then coming soon, it is back, the IDP Power Hour. So if you're into individual defensive players, that's a show to definitely check out, because I'm in 2 IDP leagues, but boy, that is a whole nother ball game when it comes to fantasy football. So definitely look for help on those. My name is Skip Newton, at SkipNewton31, on the Devy team for the NFL Draft Bible, covering the ACC and anything Devy and C2C related. Of course, we are powered by Fan Nation on Sports Illustrated, so check that out. We're doing Dynasty and Devy rankings, and there's just stuff being published every day, content for NFL draft, all players and positions, even offense, defensive line, doesn't matter. It's all out there. It's fantastic stuff. So thank you so much, listeners, for tuning in. It's good to be back on a little bit of a regular routine here, Matt. I know we struggled there. It was every 2 to 3 weeks, but I think we're going to get back on that weekly cadence, and it's good to hear your voice and talk about how hot you're doing in North Carolina. So looking forward to our next podcast. And again, thanks to everyone out there. We hope you have a great week. We'll talk to you soon. And as always, be a good human.